Hey folks, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, okay. And can you see the slides? Yes, sir. Okay, good. Okay, maybe let's wait for one more minute and then we'll begin. Okay, so let's get started. A very good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining in. My name is Rohit, and I welcome you all to the COV 886 Special Module and Algorithms course. I very recently joined IIT Delhi, so this is my first time teaching over here. I'm very excited about it, but that also means that there might be some glitches and some imperfections to begin with, so I appreciate your patience in that regard. So this module is going to focus on a research area called computational social choice. And this lecture is going to be about voting rules. But before I begin, this is just a reminder to myself that, and to all of you, that the recording is on. So if you don't want your video to be visible, please feel free to turn it off, although I will appreciate it if it is on. Just makes remote lecture feel less remote. Okay. I also apologize for the sore throat. I'm experiencing Delhi winters for the first time, so I'll learn. Okay, so let's get started. So, like I said, this course is going to be about computational social choice. And this is an area that combines two distinct areas. One is social choice, which is a subfield of economics and political science. And it's about making collective decisions. Okay, so you have preferences of individual, the society, and you use those preferences to make a decision for the society, a collective decision. And the other component is computational or computer science. And so this course is basically going to be about understanding the role of computation in collective decision-making problems. Okay. In other words, how does computer science interact with economics more broadly? Okay. So let me start with perhaps the most well-known example of a social choice problem, which is voting. So in case of voting, we are given the preferences of voters or agents over a set of alternatives or candidates. And a voting rule aggregates these preferences into a collective outcome, okay, an election winner. Now, although I've illustrated voting in the context of political elections here, its applications are much broader than that. So in particular, in things like recommendation systems, you use ideas from voting in aggregating user preferences over movies or products. And the way Google ranks its pages when you enter a search query using the page rank algorithm, that's an example of a very expensive voting rule. Okay, so there's some high profile applications. Another example of a social choice problem is matching, where imagine that you have, say, two sets of agents, right? Say employment seekers and employers, and both sides have preferences over each other. Okay, so candidates have preference over companies, companies have preference over candidates, and a matching algorithm aggregates these preferences and decides who gets which job, right? Who gets paired up with whom. Again, matching has many other applications. Most prominent ones among them are in matching resident doctors with hospitals. This is known as the National Resident Matching Program in the US, in matching school kids with schools, right? So these are known under the umbrella term of school choice programs. In matching organ donors with patients, right? So sometimes, people who are in need of organs, they are able to find willing but incompatible donors, right? And matching algorithms help you conduct these cross exchanges, right? So we are going to look at this in the course. These are known as kidney exchanges. And of course, matching is used very heavily in marketplaces such as Uber and Airbnb. Here's another example of a social choice problem. It's called fair division. In this case, we are given a set of agents and a set of resources, and these agents have some preferences over the resources. And an allocation mechanism aggregates these preferences and decides who gets which resources. Okay. Again, fair division has many other applications. For example, in splitting taxi cab rides, or in allocating radio frequency spectrum bands, and what I believe is most relevant to our current circumstances, in the allocation of scarce medical supplies, such as vaccines and PPE kits. Okay. By the way, if at any point anyone has a question, please just raise your hand. I'm monitoring the participants list. If I don't notice your raised hand, feel free to interrupt. Okay, I'd love to answer your questions throughout. Okay, so all these three problems that we saw, voting and matching and fair division, they fall under the broad umbrella called social choice. And this area is basically about making a collective decision from individual preferences. Okay. The caricature of any social choice problem basically looks like this. So on the input side, you are given the preferences of agents. And a social choice procedure aggregates these preferences and determines a societal outcome, okay, which could either be an election winner, or determining who gets which jobs, or determining who gets which resources, what have you. And given how fundamental this problem is, it should not come as a surprise to anybody that this area has been studied for a long, long time. Okay, so there have been many books written on the topic, and several Nobel Prizes have been given for contributions in social choice. This is a very impactful and very celebrated area of research. And in fact, we will hear some of these names again in the forthcoming lectures. Okay, so because social choice procedures interact with the users or the agents, it becomes pertinent to ask, well, is there a social choice procedure with certain desired economic properties? Okay. For example, one could ask, well, is there a voting rule which is truthful, in the sense that voters do not have an incentive to misreport or lie about their preferences? One could ask, is there a matching procedure which is stable? So stability roughly means that people should not break away from the assignment that you have suggested and form matches of their own. Okay, it should be the match should hold, it should be stable. Okay. Or one could ask, well, is there an allocation procedure which is fair in some provable mathematical sense and also economically efficient? Okay. So I don't expect you to understand any of these terms here, truthful or stable or fair and efficient. What I do want you to notice at this point is that the nature of questions in classical social choice theory, which is primarily within economics and political science, was existential. Okay, so traditionally social choice theory asks existential question, like, does there exist a social choice procedure with certain nice properties? By contrast, in this course, we are going to take a computer scientist's perspective on these problems. Okay. So we are no longer going to be happy just to know that there exists a nice social choice procedure out there. We also want to know, well, can you efficiently compute it? Can that social choice procedure efficiently give you nice outcomes? Okay, and efficiently in the sense of computational efficiency. Okay, so this is sort of the broad overview of what we are going to be talking about in this course. Okay. So here's roughly how this course is structured. It's going to have basically these three parts, voting and matching and fair division. In the first part, we are going to start, as in today, by talking about voting rules. We'll see a lot of examples of voting rules. In the next lecture, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into this truthfulness property. Okay, and we are going to see that there are no truthful voting rules out there. Okay, so every voting rule is flawed in some sense. However, in lectures 3 and 4, we are going to see that computer science is going to rescue this. Okay, so computation will help us achieve truthfulness in some sense. Then we'll move on to matching, and we'll start by talking about these organ donors to patient matching applications. Then we'll move on to stable matching, which I believe some of you might have already heard, the Gale-Shapley stable matching algorithm. It's often taught in introductory algorithms courses. We're going to study the economic properties of that algorithm. And then in subsequent lectures, we are going to look at other fair matching algorithms and more democratic matching algorithms. Okay. And the final part of this course is going to be about fair division, where we will start by talking about two fun problems, cake cutting and rent division. These are about allocating divisible commodities. Then we will get into allocating indivisible commodities. Okay? So things that cannot be fractionally allocated, how do you divide them fairly? And time permitting, we'll then look at a slightly different fair division problem, which is about fairly allocating seats in a parliament. There's a political twist. Okay, so this is how this course is going to look like roughly. So now I want to get into the topic of today's lecture, which is voting. And before I start to blabber on why voting is important, I want to know what you think. So voting has many applications, so maybe it is important, but I want to know why you think voting might be important. Anyone wants to comment on that? Just raise your hand. Yeah, Akash.
So because we care about what many people think in terms of when we want to decide who is the better person to, let's say, lead a. Basically, we care about democracy, and that is why we feel we need to aggregate many people's preferences.
Good. So it helps you elect leaders, right? It helps you sort of crystallize the opinion of a group. Otherwise, you will be lost in the confusion of different preferences, right? So it helps you narrow down the preferences into a nice collective decision. Good. Simarpreet?
So I guess voting is also one vote, one value, and one person. So it also promotes equality, and there is no bias in the result.
Right. So Simarpreet is thinking about this one person, one vote kind of the feature of voting, right? Which is that every person has an equal voice in determining the collective outcome. Okay, good. Anyone else? Akash, Kumar?
Sir, I think voting can in some sense provide the stability also, because the majority means majority people agree to that voting result.
Right. So if a majority agrees to the chosen result, maybe it's a good thing, right? You're satisfying a lot of people. Okay, Jitendra?
So sir, like I mean, it helps because people will have different choices. So if people agree upon so it can provide some mechanism so that people can agree upon. So like we'll make a compromise if this is how all the people think, or if this is how say the majority thinks, or say 2/3 people think.
Good. Yeah.
So it will
So
help in
Jitendra is
deciding
thinking more about the procedural aspect of voting, right? That if the procedure itself seems fair, and we know that compromises are inevitable, then at least people will agree to those compromises, right? Agree to that procedure. Okay, good. Those are some very, very good thoughts. Okay, so I mean, I had a long list of reasons about why voting is important. But just a few days ago, I found a very good reason, which I think just drives the point home. So a few days ago, I asked you all about your preferences regarding the scheduling of this lecture. Okay, what time would you like this lecture to be? And this is the result I got. Okay, so the numbers here in red, these are about, so these are the number of people who are not happy with that slot. Okay, these are the number of conflicts. Okay, and as you can observe that there is no slot that pleases everybody. Okay, so like I think Jitendra was mentioning, like you can't have one outcome that pleases everybody, right? So you have to sort of make compromises. And voting offers you a principled approach of making those compromises. I mean, as you all know now that we ended up choosing the least conflicted slot, but that's probably because I only asked you like whether you like a slot or not. I gave you a very restricted way of expressing your preferences. Maybe if I gave you a more like a richer way of expressing your preferences, you might have chosen a different slot. Who knows? So another thing that you might notice is that how you are able to express your preferences also plays an important role in voting. Okay, so I hope everyone is convinced that voting is kind of important. Okay, so here's the model that we are going to be thinking about today. So the input to our problem is it looks like this. Okay, so these V1, V2, etc. These are going to be the voters. Okay, so there's 5 voters here, and these colored circles are the candidates. Okay, and the order in which I have placed these circles is important because we are going to read this as voter one's favorite being the red color, second favorite being blue, third favorite being green, and fourth favorite being yellow. Okay, so this is basically voter V1's ranking of these candidates. So red is first place, blue second, and so on. Voter 2 has a slightly different ranking. Okay, so it ranks red first again, but it ranks green second, yellow third, and blue fourth, and so on. Okay, so this is our input. This is also known as a preference profile because it gives you the set of preferences of all the voters. Okay, and the goal will be to pick exactly one winning candidate. Okay, of course, in many voting applications, you might want to pick multiple winners, right? But today we are only going to look at situations where you only have to pick exactly one winner. Okay. Okay, so for example, on this profile, we end up picking green, okay, using some voting rule. Okay, and a voting rule is basically mapping from preference profiles to candidates. Okay, so a voting rule you can think of as a mapping that takes as input these preference profiles, a bunch of rankings of voters, and gives you as output a single winner, a candidate. Okay, and to specify this voting rule, I basically need to tell you how it works on all preference profiles. Okay, so any number of voters, any number of candidates, and any set of rankings of those voters, I should be able to tell you what output that voting rule will give you on that preference profile. Okay, so that's the way to specify a voting rule. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, so here's an easy one. So suppose you have just 2 candidates. Okay, so say just 2 colors, red and blue. What would be a reasonable way to pick a winner?
The person who is getting more votes than the other one.
Correct, right? So this is also known as the majority outcome. Okay, so basically, the candidate who gets more votes should be preferred. Makes sense because you are satisfying as many people as you can. Okay, I hope it's reasonably uncontroversial, but if anyone has any thoughts, feel free to pitch in. Okay, so voting becomes much more interesting when you have more than 2 candidates. Okay, and one of the reasons for that is no candidate may have a clear majority to begin with, right? We see that all the time in elections in India, that the parties often don't have a clear majority. So how do you make decisions in that case, right? So one very popular suggestion is called the plurality voting rule. Okay, and the way it works is as follows. So again, as an input, we are given this preference profile, for example, the one shown here. And plurality says, well, the candidate who features in the first place the most number of times should win the election. Okay. So in the profile given here, red features in the first place in 2 votes for V1 and V2. Green, yellow, and blue, they feature in the first place in 1 vote each. Okay, so basically, you can think of this as red getting 2 points and the other candidates getting 1 point each. Okay. So the plurality winner would be red. Okay. So the way I define plurality is not completely precise because, of course, there can be ties, right? How do you pick a candidate when there are ties? There are many ways of doing that. For example, you could use lexicographic tie breaking, right? So you could look at the names of the candidates, right? And in case of a tie, you pick the one who occurs the earliest in the dictionary. Okay, so for example, if there was a tie among all these colors, then red is R, green is G, yellow is Y, blue is B. So blue would have won in case of a four-way tie. Okay, it's just an example of tie breaking. Another way of tie breaking could be to just toss a coin. Okay, maybe there are many other ways of breaking ties. For today, I'm not going to bother with tie breaking, but I want you to know that it is a very important issue in voting, right? Because tie breaking specifies what the voting rule does, and that in turn affects its economic and computational properties. Okay, so it's a very important aspect, but we are not going to look into it today, right? Okay. So plurality is nice. It's very simple. But it suffers from a very sort of basic problem, which is that sometimes a majority of voters might prefer some other candidate over the one chosen by plurality. Okay, so for example, in this case here, although plurality chose red, right, there's a majority of voters who prefer green over red. Okay, so V3, V4, and V5. Right, so 3 out of 5 voters prefer some other candidate over the one chosen by this voting group. So the majority are not happy with this outcome. Okay, but despite that, plurality is very widely used, most prominently in legislative elections in Canada, in many African countries, and of course in India. Okay, maybe one of the reasons for that is it's such a simple rule to explain. Right, you can explain this to anyone and they'll understand. Okay, so plurality was maybe a little bit like it was very sort of very brutal rule in some sense, right? It only looks at the first place candidate, right? And it discards all the rest of the votes, right? Just looks at the first place candidates. Borda count is a different voting rule. It's a more nuanced voting rule that looks at the entire vote. And this rule was proposed by Jean-Charles de Borda, who lived in the 18th century, and he's someone who wore many hats. Okay? So he was a mathematician, he was a naval officer, and he was obsessed with developing measuring instruments. Okay, so he developed new instruments and refined existing instruments about making measurements, like measuring angles and lengths, etc. And this ended up in his role in the construction of what we call the meter, right? The unit meter. He played an important role in measurements related to that. He actually popularized the metric system in France and elsewhere. But for us, he did another good thing, which was to define the Borda count rule. And the way it works is as follows. So Borda count assigns points to candidates based on their position in each vote. And the way it does is that each voter gives its kth ranked candidate m minus k points if m is the number of candidates. Okay, so in this example, m is 4. Okay, so k is so red. For example, if you look at voter V1's vote, it ranks red at the first position. So from V1, the red candidate gets 4 minus 1 points, okay, 3 points. You can also think of that as the number of candidates that are below red. That's how many points it gets from voter V1's vote. Okay. Similarly, the blue candidate will get 2 points from V1's vote, and so on. Okay, and we are going to add all these points up from all the voters, and the candidate with the highest number of points is going to win. Okay, so let's see what Borda does on this example. So let's look at how many points red gets. So it gets 3 points from V1. 3 from V2, and nothing from the other voter. Nothing from the other voters. Okay, so total 6 points. Green, on the other hand, gets 1 plus 2, that's 3, plus 3, 6, plus 2 plus 1, right? So a total of 9 points. Okay, and you can check that yellow gets 7 and blue gets 8. Okay, and therefore the Borda winner should be green. Okay, is the definition of Borda count clear? Okay, so this is a little bit. I mean, it uses the entirety of a voter's vote. It does not discard everything below the first place votes. It's more nuanced than plurality, but it has its own set of problems, and that is Borda count is susceptible to strategic voting, or it's also something that is known as manipulation. We're going to talk a lot about this problem, but I just want to sort of point out one of the problems that voting rules suffer from. And here's what it means. So on this input, the Borda winner was green. Okay. Now the voter V1 is having second thoughts. Okay, it's thinking that I don't like this election. It's picking my second worst candidate. I'm very unhappy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lie about my preference. Okay, I'm going to report a different preference. So what V1 does is it just swaps the order of green and yellow in its preference. Okay, so the ballot it reports, it's slightly different from its original preference, like so. And lo and behold, now there is a tie for Borda scores. Okay, so green, yellow, and blue, they all are at Borda score of 8. And if you use the lexicographic tie-breaking rule that I pointed out earlier, right? So because blue is earliest in the dictionary order, so maybe blue ended up being the Borda winner. Okay, so why is this a problem? If I go back, note that this was this voter's original preference. The original outcome was green, but by lying about its preference, the voter was able to get a better candidate elected according to its own preference. Okay, so instead of its third favorite, it was now able to get its second favorite candidate elected, which is a better deal for voter V1. So this is known as strategic voting or manipulation or lying. Okay, and this is going to be the topic of the next few lectures. But just wanted to point out that even more reasonable looking voting rule could have its own set of problems. Any questions so far?
I think another problem here is that we assume that the second vote is a candidate being second on someone's list is worth 2/3 being first on someone's list, which is not always true.
Right. So definitely, right. So Borda is sort of making an abstraction. It's just saying that, okay, let's weigh the candidates according to this point system, right? It's not telling you that this is the best point system. It's just saying here is a point system, right? You might elect a candidate, and it might so happen that voters might have an incentive to deviate, right? So we are by no means saying that this is the best voting rule out there. This is just a voting rule that has certain problems. Okay, does that sort of address your concern?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sai, you had a hand up.
Hello.
Yeah.
So if the voting, the result counts are, let's say, voting results are standard, and people, how does the strategic manipulation work in the practical sense? Like, when the results are out, how can they pre decide the manipulation?
Good. So this is so I'm sort of hesitant in abstracting this situation with the practical sense in which voting is used, right? So of course, if voting is done and you have an outcome, then you might not be able to change it. But suppose you were able to, by some survey or by some, some internal sources, you were able to get a good sense of what other voters are going to vote. Okay, then it might be possible for you to misreport and get a better outcome. Okay, so this is what is happening before the voting is done. Okay, and this is just pointing out a possibility. It's not saying that this is always happening. It's just saying that this could be a problem in some situations.
So multiple people can collect this data, and it's like a game theory concept.
It's possible. It's possible. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay. So Borda knew about this problem, and his response was that my scheme is intended only for honest men. Okay. Well, I mean, that's one way to deal with life's problems. In the next few lectures, we are going to look at a more principled approach of dealing with manipulation. Okay. Anywho, Borda also has some applications. It's used in the Eurovision Song Contest. I don't know if people are familiar with this. And in the OpenGL library in selecting what features to use. Okay. I see a question in the chat. Sarthak is asking, can this problem also happen in plurality? Absolutely, yes. And I encourage you to think of an example. Okay.
Similar to that, what can happen is that if we know that candidate 1 is going to win, but I don't prefer candidate 1, so I can vote another candidate who I know that is more capable of winning than my candidate.
Right. So suppose your third favorite candidate was winning, right, under the original set of preferences. Maybe you could make your second favorite candidate win by pretending that it's your top placed candidate, right? If you place it at the top, that would add up 1 to its plurality score, and maybe it might win because of tie breaking or something else, right? So yes, plurality also has this problem. Okay, so let's look at a sort of a different style of voting rules now. So we have looked at a couple of rules that use the scoring system, right? Plurality just gives 1 point to the top candidate and 0 to everybody else. Borda is sort of more generous. It gives n-1, n-2, and so on, right? Now let's look at voting rules that are based on runoff. Okay, so the word runoff, its geographical meaning is basically a situation where the soil cannot hold water. Okay, so it flows away, right? And runoff has a sort of a runoff-based voting rules have a similar feeling that it's not a one-round voting rule. The votes tend to flow in the subsequent rounds. Okay, so it's a term used for multi-round voting rules. Okay. Okay. So plurality, remember, was, like I mentioned, it was sort of a brutal voting rule, right? You just look at the first place candidates, right? And that's how you determine the winners. Plurality with runoff is a bit more generous. Okay? It's going to say that, okay, let's look at the 2 candidates with the highest plurality scores, okay, in the first round. And in the next round, we are going to have those 2 go head to head against each other. Okay, so it's a 2-round voting rule. And here's how it works. Suppose this is our input. So this time we have 2 voters who have this preference, 1 voter with this preference, 2 voters with this preference, and so on. Okay. So now, anyone wants to tell me which are the 2 candidates with the highest plurality score?
Red and green.
Right, red and green. Okay. So
Red and blue.
Red and blue. Why blue?
It would be red, green, and blue.
Okay,
I mean
so
purple.
those who are saying blue should explain why. Dhruvi, maybe you want to go? Or whoever was saying blue, can you go?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. So I was saying that blue because it is present 2 times in the second row and first 1 time in the first row. So its count would be 3. And similarly with green. So actually it must be blue and green.
So remember that plurality scores were only looking at the top row. Okay, this is not Borda where we look at the entire vote. Plurality only looks at the top row. Okay, so the way you determine plurality scores is how many votes does a candidate feature in the top place. Okay, so the red candidate, the red circle, it is top placed candidate for 2 + 1 or 3 voters. Okay.
Okay.
Similarly, the green candidate is top placed for 2 voters, yellow is for 1, and blue is for 1. Okay, so the 2 candidates with the highest plurality scores would be red and green. Does that make sense? Okay, so so in the first round we are going to choose red and green. Okay, and in the next round we are going to do a head-to-head election, which means basically a 2 candidate voting problem, which we all agreed that majority is the right thing to use here. Okay, so in this case there are 2 + 1 3 voters that prefer red over green, right? And 2 + 1 + 1 or 4 voters that prefer green over red. Okay, so in the second round it will turn out that green ends up winning the election according to plurality with runoff voting. Okay, and note that in the original election, red was the plurality winner. Okay, so that's a sense in which plurality was sort of very, very taxing, right? It just looks at the first place votes, doesn't give anyone else a chance. Plurality with runoff gives someone else a chance. Okay, and it turns out that sometimes it helps. Good. Let's look at another multi-round voting rule. It's called the single transferable vote, or also known as instant runoff. And in this case, there will actually be multiple rounds, okay, not just 2. And in each round, we are going to eliminate the candidate with the lowest plurality score, and we are going to transfer its supporters' votes to their next favorite candidate. Okay, so let's look at an example to see what that means. Suppose this is our election. So again, 3 voters have this vote, 4 voters have this vote, and so on. Okay. So, okay, so someone should tell me who is the candidate with the least plurality score. Who should be eliminated in the first round?
Yellow.
Yellow, exactly, right? Yellow features in the top place only in 1 vote, whereas every other candidate is featuring in the top place at least in 4 or more votes. Okay, okay, so let's take out yellow. Okay, so these are the remaining rankings. Now we have a 3 candidate election basically. Okay, now I'm going to sort of make this picture a little bit more compact. So you notice that this ranking here, green, red, and blue, is the same as the ranking here, green, red, and blue. So I'm going to sort of merge them, right? So I'm just going to say that, okay, 2 + 1 or 3 voters have that ranking. Okay, just making the picture a little bit more compact. I hope you don't mind. Okay. Now who is the candidate with the least plurality score?
Green.
Green, right? It has a score of 5. Blue has 6, red has 6. So let's take out green. Okay. Now what should we do?
Merge the first, second, and fifth profiles and the rest.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, because you have 2 candidates, you can just look at a head-to-head election, right? Basically, all the voting rules that we have seen so far and all the ones that we are going to see, in the 2 candidate case, they all coincide with majority. Okay, so it's really, I mean, you're just basically doing a majority, no matter how you state it. Okay, so in the last round, because red is preferred over blue in 3 + 3 + 3, 9 versus 4 + 2 + 2 or 8. It's a 9 versus 8, so red wins. Okay, and why is it called transferable vote? So remember, when we eliminated a candidate, right, the favorite candidate for this voter now becomes the second placed candidate. Okay, so that's a sense in which its vote is getting transferred to its next favorite candidate. Okay, that's why it's called a transferable vote. Okay, so that's STV. Again, a very widely used voting rule, maybe not as widely as it should be, but anyway, it's used in Australia and Papua New Guinea and Ireland and Canada in various elections. It's also used in determining the best picture, like which picture wins the Academy Award, the Oscar. Okay, so it says, yeah, Sai, you have a question.
Ties in the single transferable vote how would you eliminate when there are ties?
Okay, let me go back. Oh, how would you limit ties? Oh, like I said, today I'm sort of turning a blind eye on tie breaking. There can be many ways of breaking ties, right? Lexicographic tie breaking, randomized tie breaking, what have you. But today I'm not going to talk about it. Okay, so it's sort of a separate set of problems, very interesting problems, but it's for us, I mean, because we're just getting started, it's more of a technicality. So let's not worry too much about it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, good. So STV is used in determining the best picture. Okay, anybody recognizes this building?
Rashtrapati Bhavan.
Exactly, Rashtrapati Bhavan. I did not know this until very recently that STV is used in electing the president of India as well. So good to know. There's some important applications as well. Okay, but not all is nice with STV. And the problem with it, among others, is the failure of a property called monotonicity. Okay, what does that mean? Roughly, it means that sometimes improving a candidate's support could make it worse off. Okay, let's look at an example. This is the same thing that we saw before. And recall that the STV winner was red. Okay. Now suppose these two voters, okay, they change their mind. They say that, okay, well, red is winning, so maybe let's support red. Okay, right? We're only going to improve the support of a winner, right? We are going to promote it from our third placed vote to our top placed vote, right? So how bad could it be, right? So let's do that. So suppose they promote red to the top position, okay? And let's run STV again. Okay? So again, yellow goes, okay, sorry. So let me, because now you have two similar rankings, let me merge them. Okay, so this is my input now. Okay, so let's eliminate yellow. It has the lowest plurality score. Okay, the votes get transferred. Now I eliminate blue because blue has a score of 4, whereas green has a score of 5 from these 3 votes. Okay, and red has much higher score. So blue goes out this time. Remember, in the previous iteration on the original instance, green was eliminated at this point, right? Whereas now blue goes out. Okay, and now we are left with red and green, and it turns out that now green is the winner. Okay, so what's happening? So what's happening is the failure of a property called monotonicity, right? So sometimes for certain voting rules, such as STV, it could happen that maybe a candidate is winning right now, and some voters improve that candidate's position in their vote, and all of a sudden that candidate ends up losing the election. Right? It sounds very weird because the candidate support is only improving. How could it lose an election? Right? And intuitively, the reason is because of this multi-round structure of the voting rule. Right? Sometimes improving the support of a candidate could change the order in which the other candidates are eliminated. Okay, as happened in this example, right? And in the last round, the red candidate ended up in a much tighter fight against the green candidate, right? So green was preferred by more people over red, right? But green could not make it to the later rounds in STV in the original election, whereas this time it did, right? So it's again, monotonicity is a property that you would really like, but in some very reasonable voting rules, it tends to be violated. Okay.
So,
Yes.
sir, can you please, one small clarification, can you please point out how are you counting points after you have removed a candidate?
How am I counting points after? Okay, so let's go through the example again. So at every round, I'm looking at the plurality scores for the current election, and I'm taking out the candidate with the lowest plurality score. Okay, so this is how it looked like in round 1. So I took out yellow, okay, because it has the lowest plurality score. Once I take it out, okay, Now my new election is a 3-candidate election, right? And the new plurality scores are, for blue it's 4, for green it's 2 plus 2 plus 1, because green is the top candidate for all these voters here, right? And red is the top candidate for all these voters here. Does that make sense?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, so we are evaluating a different election in each round, recomputing the plurality scores, eliminating the one with the lowest score, and repeating. Okay, until we are just left with 2 candidates, at which point you do a majority. Good. Okay. Good. So here's another flaw with multi-round voting rules. And this is, I mean, as real world as it gets. Okay, so this is a scenario from 2016 election for electing the host of Olympics. Okay, so elect who would host the 2016 Olympics. This is how it looked like. So there were 4. I mean, there's obviously some initial screening and all, but ultimately there are 4 candidates left in the race: Rio, Madrid, Tokyo, and Chicago. Okay, and these are the national Olympic committees that are representing those cities. And of course, there's a certain set of voters who are voting for, their favorite city. Okay, so this is how it looked like in round 1. Okay, so everyone sort of plugged in their favorite city, and this is how the votes looked like in round 1. So 26 in favor of in favor of Rio, 28 in favor of Madrid, and so on. Okay. Now, because Chicago got the least number of votes, it got eliminated from round 1. So in round 2, we are left with just these 3: Rio, Madrid, and Tokyo. Okay, and again, people vote. So it's somewhat unlike STV that you're supposed to sort of re-enter your ranking. Okay, it's not the same ranking that carries over. It's not exactly STV, but it's somewhat like it because you're taking out the candidate with the least plurality score. Anyway, so this is how this voting rule works. But what I want to draw your attention at is these 2 numbers here. Okay, so in the first round, there were 22 voters whose top choice was Tokyo. In the second round, Tokyo was still there, right? So the number of voters whose top choice is Tokyo should only weakly increase, but mysteriously that number went down. Okay, so this somewhat this is suggestive of the fact that people strategize even in real world elections, right? So earlier, maybe someone was trying to take support away from Chicago, so they voted in favor of Tokyo. But once they managed to knock out Chicago, right, that's when they maybe withdrew their support from Tokyo and started supporting some other city. Again, this is suggestive. I'm not saying this is exactly what those people intended, but I mean, these things happen in the real world, so it's not just a purely academic interest. Okay, so now I want to start talking about a different style of voting rules. So far we saw 2 different kinds of voting rules, which were scoring based, like Plurality and Borda, and multi-round rules like Plurality with Runoff and STV. Now I want to start talking about rules that use pairwise comparisons or head-to-head elections. And really, one person who championed those kind of voting rules was Nicolas de Condorcet, who, if you are paying attention to the years, he was a contemporary of Borda. Okay, and safe to say that him and Borda were not the best of friends. Anyway, Condorcet is also someone who wore a lot of hats. Okay, so again, he was a mathematician like Borda, but he was also a philosopher. Okay, and in his later years, he was a political voice, and especially someone he was a strong advocate for equality, gender equality, racial equality, constitutional equality, and so on. Okay, so very sort of a staunch advocate of equality in many aspects of life. But for us, the most relevant of Condorcet's contributions will be this property called the Condorcet criterion, okay, which says that, okay, if there exists a candidate that beats every other candidate in a head-to-head election, selected. Okay, it is a principle that a voting rule should follow. Okay? So let's look at an example. Suppose this is the input for our problem. So let's look at how do these head-to-head elections work out. Okay, so let's compare red and blue. Okay, so in this election, 4 voters prefer red to blue, these 3, and this one here, and 1 voter prefers blue to red. Okay, so red wins this head-to-head election against blue. Similarly, if you look at yellow and blue, so this voter here is the only one who supports yellow, and the others support blue. So blue wins this election. And if you compare red with yellow, then red wins the head-to-head election, right? Because of these 3 voters. Okay. So if I have to capture the same information in the form of a graph, I can do it like this. So these are the 3 candidates, and I draw an edge from, say, red to blue if red beats blue in a head-to-head election, like here. Okay. So, of course, I mean, because red is winning all of its head-to-head elections, it seems reasonably uncontroversial to pick red as the winner of this election, right? Because if you compare it against any other candidate, there's a majority of voters that prefer red to that candidate. Okay, this is known as the Condorcet criterion. Any voting rule that on any given profile picks such a candidate, if it exists, is said to satisfy this Condorcet criterion. But the keyword here is if. Okay. And really, the problem is that a Condorcet winner, so such a candidate is called a Condorcet winner, the one that wins all of its head-to-head elections. A Condorcet winner may not always exist. Okay. And here's a very simple election where that happens. Look at these 3 voters. If you look at the pairwise comparisons, this is how they look like, and this is how the head-to-head election graph looks like. Okay, you notice that there is a cycle. So there is no candidate that wins all of its. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Hi, folks. Can you still hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, looks like I got disconnected. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what I was saying was that there could exist elections where a Condorcet winner may not exist, right? So every candidate loses out in some head-to-head election, right? So this very, very convincing notion of a winner may not always be possible to achieve. Okay, and this is known as the Condorcet paradox. Why is it a paradox? Well, because note that each voter's preference was perfectly rational. It was like a perfectly nice ranking. It's a perfectly transitive ranking, right? But somehow, when you aggregate the preferences of voters, the preferences of the society may not be transitive. They may not be rational, right? So it's a paradox because rationality on the individual side does not translate to rationality at a societal level, right? So while an individual can easily decide, okay, this is my first candidate, this is my second candidate, and so on, the society as a whole might have a tough time doing that. And this example points out why. Okay. Anyway, the Condorcet winner is a very nice solution concept. So let me talk about a couple of voting rules that do satisfy that property. So the first voting rule is the Copeland voting rule. Okay, and here's how it works. So it looks at the head-to-head elections between candidates, all head-to-head elections. So if you have M candidates, you'll have M choose 2 such elections. And for each head-to-head election, a candidate that wins that head-to-head election gets 1 point for winning it, 0 for losing it, and 0.5 in case of a tie. Okay. So suppose I have an election like this. Let's look at the head-to-head between red and blue. Okay. So so right now 3 + 1 + 1 or 5 voters prefer red, and 8 voters prefer blue. Okay. So it's a 5 to 8, which means blue wins this head-to-head, and that means it gets 1 Copeland point. Okay, red gets nothing. Right? Okay. Let's look at another head-to-head. So this time between red and green. Okay, so red is preferred by 3 + 1 + 1 + 4 or 9 voters versus 4 for green. So this time red gets a point and green gets nothing. Okay, I hope the action of the voting rule is clear. And you do this for all pairs. Okay, so there's 4 candidates, so there's 6 pairs. The total Copeland score of a candidate is the sum of its scores from all the head-to-head elections. So if you look at red, it gets 2 points. Okay. Yellow gets 1. Yeah, it only gets 1 point. Green gets nothing. It's 0 in all elections. And blue gets 1 + 1 + 1. Okay, so it wins all of its head-to-head. So it gets 3 Copeland points, and that means the Copeland winner is blue. Okay. All good? All right. I hope you can appreciate that Copeland winner is a very widely used voting rule, most prominently in sports tournaments. So it's used in football leagues, in cricket tournaments, in chess championships, and in many, many others. Right? So why do I say that? Well, because whenever 2 teams play each other, right? So sometimes the winning team gets either 2 points or 3 points, and the loser gets nothing. And in case of a tie, they both get 1 point each. Right? So this is sort of like a Copeland rule. Right? You can think of each game as a head-to-head election between those 2 teams, right? And you're using a similar kind of scoring. So it's not exactly Copeland. You're using some variant of Copeland, but you can think of it that way. Okay. I have been pointing out problems of all voting rules, so why leave Copeland? One of the problems of Copeland is that sometimes voters are better off by not voting. Okay. So here's the example that we just saw a moment ago, right? Blue was the one winning the Copeland election. Okay. Now, so look at these 3 voters here. Okay. They are not very happy because their second favorite candidate is winning, not their favorite. So they say, okay, I mean, what's the point of going to the election center, right? Let's just sit at home. Okay. This staying at home would be a good advice in COVID times, but turns out that Copeland also incentivizes people to stay at home. Why? Suppose these voters stay at home. If you run the Copeland election on just this leftover preferences, okay, turns out that red is the new Copeland winner. Okay, so just by staying at home, these 3 voters managed to get their top choice elected by not participating in the election at all. Okay, and that's a downside because you want a voting rule to bring people to vote, and if it doesn't, then that's a problematic situation. Okay, any questions? Okay, so let's move on. Here's the final voting rule for the day.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, like that transitivity problem you mentioned in the previous one.
Yes.
Doesn't that still hold for this Copeland rule?
In what sense?
Like if we just go to the
back to that
1-1
slide.
problem. Yeah.
So you're talking about the Condorcet paradox, are you?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So if we apply this Copeland rule, sorry, this method to this particular situation.
Yes.
Isn't it the same? Like each of these get 1 point. Like
correct. Yeah. So I mentioned this Condorcet criterion, right, on this previous slide, and the keyword here was if, right? So if there exists a candidate that wins all of its head-to-head elections, in other words, if there exists a Condorcet winner, a reasonable voting rule should pick it, right? It would be very strange to not pick such a candidate who wins all of its head-to-head elections. right? So whenever in a preference profile there exists a Condorcet winner, maybe our voting rule should pick that candidate, right? Of course, there could exist preference profiles such as this one, where a Condorcet winner does not exist, right? And on those profiles, the voting rule is, it could do some other things. It could pick a candidate by a different method, right? But on the profiles where a Condorcet winner does exist, it makes sense to pick that candidate, right? That's what the Condorcet criterion property says. Not all voting rules satisfy this property, right? As an exercise, think about whether plurality satisfies this property or Borda satisfies this property, and let me know. Okay, but what I can tell you is that Copeland does satisfy that property, and it's easy to see because if a candidate wins all of its head-to-head elections, it gets 1 point from every head-to-head, so it will obviously have the maximum Copeland score, right? Now, if there is no Condorcet winner, well, I don't know. I mean, the voting rule could do its own thing and pick a candidate differently, right? So, for example, on this particular example here, like you observed, every candidate is getting 1 Copeland point, right? So there's a tie. Now, how you determine winner depends on how you specify tie breaking, right? Which I said I will not talk about today, but you have already observed that it becomes important in some situations, right? So yes, absolutely. A Condorcet winner may not always exist. When it exists, it is desirable to choose it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Okay, so let me move to the final voting rule for today, which is the Schulze voting rule. And I hope that as students of computer science, this is the voting rule whose definition you will enjoy the most. It has the most computer sciencey definition, or the most sort of mathy definition of all voting rules. It's a very fun way to define it. Okay, so let's do it step by step. Okay, so a Schulze winner, I mean, is determined by picking the best path in a pairwise comparison graph. Okay, none of these terms on the slide will make sense right now. Okay, so let me just start by a simpler setting, which is to just take an example. Okay, so let's look at an example, and then we'll gradually define what Schulze voting rule does, because the definition is a bit involved, but also a lot of fun. So suppose here's the election. Okay, I'm going to first of all compute a matrix, okay, whose rows and columns are all the candidates. Okay, and the way this matrix is defined is that if I look at, say, the blue row and the red column, okay, then the number that goes here is the number of voters who prefer blue to red minus the number of voters who prefer red to blue. Okay, number of voters preferring blue to red minus the number of voters preferring red to blue, right? So row over column minus column over row. That's how you define these entries. So what should it be? Well, how many voters prefer blue to red? These 2, these 4, these 4, and these 3. So 2 plus 4 plus 4 plus 3, right? That's 13. And the number of voters who prefer red to blue is 8. Okay, so the number you write down in this place here would be 13 minus 8, or 5, or rather plus 5. Okay, good. Note that the entry for the red row and the blue column would be a sign change of this entry, right? Because of the way we have defined it. More generally, this matrix would be sort of skew symmetric, right? So the transpose entries would sum up to 0, again, just because of the way we have defined it. And the diagonal entry should be 0, like so. Okay, so all diagonals are 0, and all mirrored entries across the diagonal they sum up to 0. This is -5, this is +5, and so on. Is the definition of this matrix clear to everybody? Okay. So I've extracted some information from this election. Okay, so let me forget about the election now, because all I'm going to focus on in this is this matrix here. And in fact, I'm going to sort of represent this matrix in the form of a graph. Okay, So the vertices of this graph are the candidates. And I'm going to draw an edge from blue to red if the corresponding entry is positive, and I'm going to give that edge a weight of that entry. Okay, so I'm not drawing the negative edges because they are in the opposite direction. They have a negative sign. So you can imagine that they are there, but I just haven't drawn them. Okay, but I'm basically representing this matrix in a more visual manner. Okay, so this is the graph I'm going to be working with, and this graph is actually going to help me to define the Schulze rule. Okay, let me get rid of the matrix as well. Let's just use this graph. Okay, so I'm going to say that, I mean, we can think, because it's a graph, we can think of paths or chains, right, in this graph. Now I'm going to say that the strength of a path is the weight of the weakest link in that path. Okay, so let's look at an example. So let's look at a path green to yellow to red. Okay, so I'm looking at this path here. Okay, what is the strength of this path? Anyone? 1, right? Because 1 is the weakest link on this path, right? Okay. What about green, yellow, blue, red? This Z-shaped path.
3.
3, right? Because 3 is the weakest link among 3, 17, and 5. Okay, so that's the strength of these paths. So a path is only as strong as the weakest link in it. Okay, so let me ask you another question. What's the strongest path from red to green?
It is basically directly from red to green. It has strength 7.
Why is that?
Because there are no other paths from red to green.
Right. So let's look at what all paths are there from red to green. You could either go directly, right? That's a path of strength 7. You could take this edge, but that's a negative edge, right? So there's a -5 in this direction. So maybe not such a good idea to take this, right? Similarly, this edge here, red to yellow, is a -1. Right? So that's not going to help either. Right? So that's this thing here is the strongest path. Well done. What about the strongest path in the other direction, from green to red?
It has strength 5.
Why?
Because basically there are two paths with only positive weights in the path, and the higher one is from green to blue to red, and that has strength 5.
Right. So let's look at the paths from green to red. Okay. One path, like Akash mentioned, is the green to blue to red path, right? And the weakest link in it is 5. So the strength of that path is 5. There's another path, though. This is not the only path. There's another path, green to yellow to red, right? But it has a strength of only 1. So it can't be the strongest path, right? And of course, we can't go directly because that's a -7, right? There's yet another path. What did I miss here?
Green to yellow to blue to red.
Yes, exactly, right? So there's green to yellow to blue to red, right? But this we have already counted this edge in the green to blue to red path, right? So it's not improving on the previous strongest path. So again, this path also has a strength of 5. There are 2 paths with
Sir,
strength
it has the strength of 3.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Absolutely, you are absolutely right. Yes, it has the strength of 3. In fact, yes. So there's a unique strongest path. Thank you so much. Yes. So this has a strength of 3 actually. Good. Right. So there's a unique strongest path, and it's this one. Very good. Okay. So I hope the notion of strength and the strongest paths is clear. Okay. So let me introduce another terminology, which is something called the chain beats relation. So I'm going to write it as a double greater than. So you should read this as A chain beats B, okay, or A path beats B, whatever you want to call it. So we say that a candidate A chain beats another candidate B if the strongest path from A to B is stronger than the strongest path from B to A. Okay, so it's a bit of a mind bender, but what it's doing is that it's comparing strongest paths in the opposite directions, from A to B and from B to A, right? And whichever is stronger, we say that in that direction, the candidate chain beats the other. Okay. Okay. So let's look at an example to understand this better. So I claim that red chain beats green. Okay. Can anyone explain why?
Because the strength of red to the strongest path from red to green was of strength 7 and green to red was of strength 5.
Okay. Anyone disagrees with any case? Good. Right. So we just saw this example, right? We computed the strongest path from red to green and green to red. Right. The strongest path from red to green was 7, was the direct path. And the strongest path in the opposite direction was via the blue node, which has a strength of 5. So because the strongest path from red to green has a higher strength than the one from green to red, we're going to say that red chain beats green. Okay. So although note that in this pairwise comparison graph, red beats green. Okay, but that's not what we are after. We are after the chain beats relation. Okay, so I'm going to represent the chain beats relation by a different graph over here at the bottom of the screen. Right, I'm going to draw an edge from red to green, pointing towards in this direction to denote that red chain beats green. Okay, this is sort of a coarse notation to capture what we're observing here. Okay. Okay, so let's figure out the chain beats for all pairs very quickly. So I claim that red chain beats blue. Can someone who has not spoken before explain why? Did everyone has spoken already? Okay.
The red to blue,
Yes.
the path is it has the strength 7, and blue to red.
You have to wait. You have to also tell me the path.
Okay, so red to green, and from green to blue, the
Okay,
path
it has a strength of 7.
Yes, and from blue to red, it's 5. So
from blue to red, it's 5. Okay, so why is there no stronger path? Because these are incoming edges, so of course they can't be a path. So this is the strongest. And for paths going from red to blue, there's again one outgoing edge here. You could have gone this way or that way, right? If you've gone this way, then again the strength is 7. If you would have gone that way, then the strength would have been 3. So that would not have helped, right? So well done. The strongest path is red to green to blue, red to blue. Okay, which has a strength of 7. The opposite direction, you have a strength of 5. So of course, red chain beats blue. Good. Let me capture that in our picture. Okay, so I hope everyone has understood what chain beats means. You can do this exercise offline that, yellow chain beats red and yada, yada, yada. You will find that yellow actually happens to chain beat everybody. Okay. And now I want you to read the definition on the top of the slide. So Schulze says that winner is the candidate who chain beats every other candidate in the pairwise comparison graph. Okay. So according to Schulze, the winner should be yellow. Okay. So this is a pretty interesting definition, uses graphs and paths. And note that chain beats does not always go well with beats in the pairwise comparison graph. So here, green beats yellow, right, in a head-to-head election, but yellow chain beats green, right? So it does not always obey the head-to-head election direction. Okay. Okay. So this is very good. In this example, there happened to exist a candidate that chain beat everybody, right? But I mean, is it obvious that such a candidate would always exist? At the moment, it should not be very obvious. But as it turns out, that actually such a winner always exists. So there always exists a candidate that chain beats every other candidate. Okay, so this is a somewhat surprising observation. And I mean, it's weird, right? Because we are surprised that the voting rule is well defined. Like, why should it be surprising? But it's that's how the definition is. And the intuitive reason for that is that the chain beats relation is transitive. Okay, so if A chain beats B and B chain beats C, then you can show that A chain beats C. In fact, I will encourage you all to try to prove this on your own. It's a very nice exercise. But all in all, a Schulze winner always exists. There always exists a candidate that chain beats everyone else. And by this definition, that would be a Schulze winner. Okay, so very, very roundabout definition, very complicated definition, but it's that such a winner always exists. So this is a nice thing to have. Plus, this rule also satisfies the Condorcet criterion. So whenever there exists a Condorcet winner, turns out that Schulze will pick it. Given
Sir,
it's
sir, can we go through the pair yellow and green?
Yellow and green.
Yeah.
Did I do?
No,
yellow
we
and green?
we did not cover it.
Okay.
So yes. So for yellow and green,
Mhm.
green have the strongest link as 3 to yellow.
So you're talking about green to yellow strongest path?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so there's one of 3 here. There's one going here, but it doesn't come back. Yeah, so this is 3, yeah.
And from yellow to green.
Yellow to green, you have this path here, which is 5 already. So you're beating green already.
From
right?
yellow to green.
To blue to red to green.
Okay, sir. Okay, so okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's a good exercise. I think you should all verify whatever things I'm skipping in the lecture. It's good to understand all these things later on. Okay, yeah. So do try out this thing. Okay, this transitivity property. It's a nice thing to work on. Okay, so given the complicated definition, given the computer sciencey and mathy definition, you should not be surprised that it's a voting rule that's used in technical and academic circles. Okay, so it's used by various Linux distributions like Ubuntu and Debian and Gentoo. It's used by IEEE and ACM, which should be familiar to students in computer science and electrical engineering. It's used by Topcoder in ranking who are the top coders. And interestingly, even MTV has used this voting rule at some point in determining which music videos to show in their programs. It has some curious applications. I'm not aware of too many applications of this in legislative elections, probably because this is not the easiest voting rule to explain, right? Imagine explaining plurality versus explaining Schulze, right? It's much easier to explain plurality.
Rohit,
Okay.
this is Subodh here.
Hi, Subodh.
Hi. So just wondering how this algorithm is used in these Linux distributions?
Yeah, so these are used in some council elections and feature selection. So yeah. So in different settings, it's used in different. It's used for different reasons. But yeah. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, good. So I sort of threw a bunch of voting rules at you today, right? We saw a couple of score-based voting rules, plurality and border. We saw a couple of multi-round voting rules or runoff-based rules, plurality with runoff and STV. And we saw a couple of Condorcet rules, Copeland and Schulze. And turns out that there exist elections where all these voting rules give you different outcomes. Okay, this is quite surprising because each of these voting rules seem very reasonable, right, in their own right. Right, they're using preferences in some intuitive manner, but there are situations where they all give different outcomes, right? And this is a very interesting thing. It's not a bug. I mean, in some sense, it's a feature because it's saying that it depends on how you define your social choice procedures, your voting rules, right? You can't have it all. Each of these rules has some good properties, some not so good properties, and they can give you different outcomes. So it's a very nice thing to know that they can be maximally divergent in some situations. Good. Okay, so let me wrap up by saying a word or two about the course logistics. So in case you haven't figured out already, there's a website for this course where you can find all the information about the lectures, the references. There's a list of projects that I'll talk about in a second. Yeah, anything you want to know about this course, you'll find it here. I hope you are all subscribed to Microsoft Teams. That's where we'll have all the announcements, right, regarding class timings, deadlines, etc. So do make sure you are on Microsoft Teams list. And the most anticipated bullet, which is the evaluation policy. So this is going to be a research level course. I try to not include any assignments or exams in evaluation, but there's a grade to be given, so I have to use some yardstick to evaluate you. So here's what I thought was reasonable. So 20% of your grade is going to depend on lecture scribing, which is basically taking notes for each lecture. So today, I think Aniket and Akash have very kindly agreed to it, but in the subsequent lectures, I'll keep appointing groups of 2. Those of you who haven't signed up for groups, please do so soon, so that you will know which lecture you're scribing in advance. Right? It's good for you. It's also good to familiarize yourself with LaTeX. Okay, so if you don't know what LaTeX is, check it out, get some practice with it. It's a way of typesetting stuff. There's also a LaTeX template on the course website, so that will help you get started. Okay, and 20% of your grade is going to depend on class participation. This is somewhat vaguely defined, but that basically means ask a lot of questions. Okay, not just any kind of questions, but I mean those somewhat meaningful questions. Get involved, discuss stuff among yourselves, explore, find out more. Okay, so this is the exploratory part of the course. Just participate and get involved. Okay, that's what it is meant for. I hope it's a good substitute to the attendance, like score for attendance. I don't like scoring attendance, but I hope if you participate in class, that could be a proxy for it. And the most important part of your grade would be based on projects, both presentation and the report. And the projects will entail understanding either a paper or a set of closely related papers thoroughly. Okay, and when I say thoroughly, I really mean deeply and thoroughly. You should have a very good idea of what that paper or those papers are about. You should know the background really well, what the contributions are, what is good about the paper, what is not so good about the paper, right? If you came up with any observations of your own, right? If you came up with any new results on your side, you should definitely include those in your presentation and your report. Okay? Overall, the goal of this course is to help you get started with research in computational social choice and more generally just acclimatize you with how research is done. Okay, so I hope that by scribing lectures, you will get some practice in formal writing, right? By participating in class discussions, you will sort of refine your communication skills as far as discussion is concerned. And by doing the project presentation and report, you will be able to disseminate your work better. Okay? You can find a suggestive list of projects on the course website. It's a suggestive list. You don't have to follow it. If you want to work on something else, you are free to do so. And the final order of business is that you are allowed and actually encouraged to work in groups for lecture scribing and for projects. Okay, so I've already asked you for making groups on the lecture scribing front. In a week or two, I'll ask you to start thinking about the project groups and project topics as well. But yeah, so these are the things that you can do collaboratively. Participation is on your own. Okay, good. So this is all I had to say for today's lecture. Next time, we are going to talk about why truthful voting is impossible. These are some of the references for today. You can check out the slides on the course website. I hope to also upload the video there. And yeah, thank you for joining, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Sir,
Akash,
will
yeah.
there be a piazza for the class?
No, not yet. I mean, do you need it? We can start one.
So it might just be better for discussions. If
Let's do that. Okay, I'll do that. Anything else? Shivangi?
Okay, sir, I just have a question. Like you just said, plurality is easy to explain to people. So that is mostly used in legislative elections. So what other criteria are considered before choosing a voting procedure? Like there are so many algorithms. So
Yes, yes, yes. There's a whole zoo of voting rules, right? Explainability of the rule and understandability of the rule by non-experts is a very practical concern, right? So Schulze has many nice properties, but because it's harder to explain, it's unlikely that a commoner would be able to appreciate what that voting rule is doing. That's why you don't see large-scale applications of Schulze. Plurality, on the other hand, is very easy to understand, so that's why it's used very widely. Which voting rule is the best? Well, that's the $1 million question. In the next lecture, we will see principled ways of answering that question. And spoiler alert, the answer is none. Okay, so every voting rule is flawed in some sense. Still, given those flaws, which voting rule is the best, right? Still under those compromises. One way to do that could be to not look at the output of the voting rule on a profile by profile basis. Rather, just write down a certain set of properties that you want the voting rule to satisfy. Okay, so you could say that, okay, I'm going to use the voting rule that satisfies the Condorcet criterion. Okay, or I'm going to use the voting rule that satisfies monotonicity. Okay, you can list down a bunch of desirable properties and check if there is a voting rule that satisfies all those properties. If yes, you use that voting rule, right? In the next lecture, we are going to see that even for a combination of like very reasonable properties, turns out there is no voting rule that satisfies all of them. Right, so certain combinations of properties just cannot coexist. These things are known under the name of Arrow's impossibility theorem or Gibert-Satterthwaite theorem, and we are going to see those in the next lecture. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no questions, let me thank you again for joining me on a Saturday afternoon. Next lecture, we will probably do it at the same time next week. So Saturday, 3 p.m. If there's any change, I'll intimate you on Microsoft Teams. Okay. Okay, so I hope the scribes for the next lecture can volunteer. Otherwise, I'll have to assign you. So let me know if you want to scribe the next lecture, and do fill in the scribe groups soon. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone.
thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.